Live from Plutopia Towers in wonderful downtown Austin, Texas. The Plutopia News Network presents Plutopia Live. And tonight we are going to hear a monologue, it looks like, because I'm the only one here. I'm John Lebkowski. I am usually the co-host with Scoop Sweeney of the Plutopia News Network live stream. And we also have a weekly podcast, which is available on all the familiar podcast channels. And also you can go to plutopia.io and stream right there. And if you go to plutopia.io, you'll also find a lot of backlogged stuff. This is streaming on our YouTube channel, where pretty much everything that we've recorded is also available, a lot of it as pure video. So we welcome you to thumb through the many recordings that we have, and please subscribe here on YouTube if the Spirit moves you to hear more as we go forward. We have a number of pretty terrific guests, and lately we've been talking about a diversity of subjects, from climate change to artificial intelligence to a recently recorded, not yet published podcast about Buddhism. Tonight, the title of our show is Reality is a Conspiracy. And theoretically, we're here to talk about conspiracy theories. And there are certainly a lot of them, but I can tell you what touched this off a bit. What made me think that it would be a good thing to talk about, I heard recently of the death of Michael Protzman. Michael Protzman died on June 30th. Michael Protzman was also known within QAnon as Negative 48. And he's the guy who, back in 2021, convinced his followers that President John F. Kennedy was going to reappear at Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas, where JFK was shot and killed in 1963, that he was actually going to, I guess, come back from the dead. And he said that Kennedy, even though Kennedy had been a Democrat, that he was going to reinstate Donald Trump as president. And his followers, even though Protzman died, he was in an accident and he died, but his followers are still waiting for Kennedy's return. So that's a pretty interesting story. It's kind of hard to figure out how exactly would you come to believe that a former president was going to come back from the dead? And why would you connect a well-known, well-respected Democratic president of like over 50 years ago? Why would you connect him with Donald Trump and with the revival of a Republican presidency in the 21st century? I just don't get it. But the guy did convince a lot of people, and they showed up. There was a huge crowd of people who showed up when Kennedy was supposed to appear, and oddly, Kennedy did not appear. So Protzman kept advancing this theory, and I guess moving the date. Just didn't happen. So he had a motocross accident, died himself, and I suppose they're waiting now for him to come back. So that's one conspiracy theory that's fairly common. And certainly conspiracy theories are more common now. Maybe not more common now. You know, I thought about this. we assume that there are more conspiracy theories now than there were in years past, but it's very possible that we're just hearing more about them because we have so many ways for people to circulate their information and misinformation and disinformation. There are so many channels available to us. And currently with Twitter in a kind of meltdown, there's a number of additional channels that are starting to appear that are hoping to pick up all or most or at least some of Twitter's population as it flees from the site, which may ultimately crash. I know that Elon Musk has been trying to keep the thing viable and active, but it's bound to be bleeding money. And you hear stories about how rents aren't being paid and technologies aren't being maintained. So Twitter is very likely, I hate to say this because I'm often wrong. I remember years ago that I predicted the demise of Facebook. More than once, when Facebook would do something stupid, I would say, well, that's it. Facebook is going to go away. They're not going to survive this. But they did something smart, and they managed to snatch victories from the jaws of defeat and soldier on. So this may happen as well with Twitter. But meanwhile, a lot of people have chosen to leave Twitter for whatever reason. I hear many people say that it's just a kind of toxic stew of conversations that they don't want to hear. So they were pretty much ready to leave before Elon Musk showed his face at the door. And many of those people have migrated to systems like Mastodon. Mastodon is actually one of the first systems built to be somewhat Twitterish that picked up a lot of followers. And Mastodon was actually something that emerged from the indie web movement. And the idea of the indie web movement was to create a web that was independent from big corporations and Facebook and the Twitters and the Instagrams and all those various highly trafficked social media platforms that were really, I guess the word I would have to use is they were exploiting their users. Basically you're selling your users to advertisers. And we've talked about that many times in the past. Early on, we said that the user on a site like Facebook was really not the user, but the product. That the whole business model was constructed, not at first. I think they kind of felt their way into this, but eventually they found that they could sell eyeballs to advertisers. The television model. In television, this was highly centralized mass media that depended on advertising and was able to attract a lot of advertising money because at one time there weren't that many television networks or channels available. And you could reach a huge number of people if you ran an ad on, say, a CBS show in prime time. People were sitting at home watching television at night. They still are, but there are so many potential channels to watch now. The mind share is much more fragmented. And in addition to the channels that you can watch on a big flat screen, we don't have television sets like we used to. Now we have massive flat screen devices, and we have really dozens and dozens of potential channels to watch, potential streams of programming. So you don't really have the whole audience together in the same way that you did in the era of mass media. And social media, similar thing. Social media is kind of fragmented, but for the past few years, Twitter and Facebook have sort of been where people would go, and Instagram, which is actually part of Facebook, which is now Meta, and it's part of Meta. And really what Meta was about, what Facebook, which became Meta, was about finding a way to capture as many of those users as possible so that you could sell advertising. And the way that they sell advertising is not big mass advertising. They allow you to buy kind of smaller hunks of eyeballs, and you specify the kinds of people that you want to see your advertising. And that's been pretty lucrative for them. It's a little bit more micro, versus the macro way of handling advertising on television. But it works really well, and it's partly because everybody and his uncle's brother has a Facebook account. So you've got so many potential eyeballs that you can reach. And because of the kinds of specifications you can make to determine the types of users that will see your ads, it can really work pretty well for you. You can really get pretty good engagement if you make the right kinds of specifications. So Facebook has been hugely successful, and it's partly because they can attract such a large number of people because they have huge network effect. So many people are on Facebook now and don't want to leave because so many of their friends are on Facebook. It's like they're being held hostage by their friends. I think it was Cory Doctorow who used that terminology, hostages on Facebook. So you have these platforms that have fairly big audiences, and they become an attractive place for people who want to advance conspiracy theories for whatever reason, like to their own end. A lot of the wilder conspiracy theories were being pitched on the less trafficked and kind of weirder sites, the 4chan, 8chan kind of sites, and darker parts of the web, I guess you might say. But particularly if it comes to political messaging, which can include conspiracy theories, there actually is at least one political party now that is using conspiracy theories to engage followers, meaning engage voters who will vote for them. So they're publishing all kinds of weird shit. And how do they get it? How do they reach people with it? They can reach people through social media. They can reach people through email. Early on, I know the GOP, the Republicans were sending each other emails with crazy stories in the emails. And from what I gathered at the time, and I was exposed to this because I have, had Republicans in the family, and they would include me in those emails sometimes. And I asked a cousin who had sent me one of those emails once. It made a particularly wild claim. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I said, you can't possibly believe this. And he said, oh, no, I don't believe it. He said, we just tell ourselves shit like this all the time. He says, we just kind of, it's funny. We enjoy talking about it. So there's that element, there's the fact that that party has, for many years, probably before they even had email, they had ways of passing stories around that were just kind of crazy, but that they kind of enjoyed telling. It was sort of like, throw around a few myths about the other guys, the other party, as a kind of like political chain yanking, and basically also affirmation of your own political beliefs. The story doesn't have to be true to be sort of affirming. It's like you're creating myths that you can all gather around. You can gather around the same fire and warm yourselves. So I think that, that has gone on for a long time. Now, in saying all this, I've drifted a little bit away from what I saw as the subject of tonight's show when I said reality is a conspiracy. And the fact is that the way that we make sense of things as human beings is that we tell stories to each other. And the way we try to grasp the world, especially the world and the universe, all that bigness and all the mysteries that are out there, is that we create myths that give us a sense of having a handle on reality. But reality is so much bigger than all of that. And we can't even see or hear everything because our senses have their own limitations, right? So we create stories, and we create myths, and we create heroes, and we tell stories about gods. Originally there were multiple gods, and they represented various forces within the universe and within nature, things that were having huge impacts on people that they didn't really completely comprehend. How is this happening? Why did that thunderstorm blow through when it did and take down all of our teepees? Well, it was a thunder god who was slapping us silly. Oh, I just got a message from Scoop. He's been waylaid by the Illuminati. He does hope to make it, I think, before we're done. And if he doesn't make it, and if Susie doesn't make it, I may just cut this short. There's only so much I can say as a single person with a head full of worms. But back to what I was talking about. So the reality is constructed as a kind of consensual hallucination. There was a book by Berger and Luckman years ago called The Social Construction of Reality. And, regardless of the book, the concept I thought was a good one. The idea that reality is constructed socially, in other words, through social interactions and understandings and shared or consensual understandings. And, there's this idea of the consensual hallucination. I think that came up when we were first talking about cyberspace. And I believe that the source of this label consensual hallucination was William Gibson, who had written Neuromancer, which was a book that described a coder, a person who had tech chops, who could jack into the matrix or into cyberspace. Cyberspace being the space that is created by all that data in the computer networks. He had seen some computer games that sort of got into his head, and he sort of pulled together this idea of a sense of space within computers and computer networks, a sense of being in a place, even though it's bits and bytes and it's not necessarily a place. There's no fixed geolocation for it. It's just all over the place, and it's everywhere and nowhere, right? So the idea was that you could have a consensual hallucination of this shared space in virtual reality. But in fact, the idea of a consensual hallucination is something that we could apply more broadly. We depend on our shared understanding of reality to get a sense of what reality is. And when that breaks down, we're in a place of difficulty. We have potential chaos and potential misunderstanding at very high levels. That's what we have now. We have this sense that there's dueling realities, or there's no real authority for reality, no really authority for understanding. Sense making is all over the place. And that means that our communications are derailed somewhat by the fact that we don't have a shared understanding anymore, and people can be coming from radically different places. And maybe they always were, but they still sort of assumed that they were in agreement, even if you might align the thinking of one person with the thinking of another person, if you could pull it out of their heads, and it might just not align, but they might assume that it aligns. But now we no longer have that assumption. We're not sure of anything. I was reading a bit about Robert Anton Wilson, who, among other things, was one of the inspirations for some of the work we did at Fringeware years ago. Before that, let's go back to the 60s, when we had the counterculture, the hippie movement, and all of that. And people were throwing bumper stickers on their cars that said, "Question authority." This whole idea that authority is not necessarily authoritative, and that maybe we should be questioning it. Maybe we should be prepared to interrogate it. But that has snowballed over the years. It started on the left. Now it's found its way into the right. And on the right now, they have this idea of Steve Bannon's thing of flooding the zone with shit and creating chaos, and undermining the sense of reality and the sense of understanding that people have, so that you really don't feel completely comfortable with your sense of reality, or maybe you double down on the stories, the narratives that you tell yourself to describe your sense of reality, and totally want to reject anyone else's interpretation. So in politics, what you hope for is communication between, I'll say parties. I mean, that's kind of what we got. We got this structure of parties. So it used to be that the Republicans and the Democrats kind of understood each other. They knew they had a different idea about what policy should be. They had a different idea about how things should go. But they also understood that they were only a percentage of the whole, and that they had to come to some kind of agreement, and that they really needed to understand each other, and they really needed to be able to make compromises with each other that would be somewhat comfortable for both sides, but not necessarily, everybody wouldn't get exactly what they want. So you could have these kind of compromise agreements, and they might bicker, and they might say rude things about each other, but you didn't have this thing of like the Republicans saying that the Democrats are draining the blood of children to extract adrenochrome so that they can become more youthful. That's kind of a wild conspiracy theory right there. Yes, there are people who abduct children. Yes, there's child sex trafficking. There's a lot of bad things that are happening. It's not a political party that's doing it. It's not Democrats. It's not Republicans. It's not communists. It's not, they're bad people exploiting children, but they're also not, as far as I know, they're not draining their blood to get some substance. Adrenochrome doesn't do what the conspiracy theorists think it'll do. There is such a thing as adrenochrome. The people who actually started using this idea of adrenochrome, let's see, I have a reference for this if I can find it. Adrenochrome in culture, let's see. In popular culture. So I'm getting this from Wikipedia. You may argue that Wikipedia is not exactly an authoritative source because it's crowdsourced, but it tends to be a pretty good source as far as I've found. I know how the Wikipedia editorial processes work, and I think they do a pretty good job, of staying on factual representation and making sure that there's sites for everything. Anyway, in Wikipedia, they talk about adrenochrome in popular culture in the adrenochrome article. And Aldous Huxley had mentioned it, and Anthony Burgess mentioned it in A Clockwork Orange. But they're saying they think where it caught on was Hunter Thompson in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. That Hunter Thompson had talked about using adrenochrome, and that this appeared in the film version of Fear and Loathing, which Terry Gilliam made. And Terry Gilliam said that as far as they knew, this drug was entirely fictional. And he didn't think that Hunter Thompson even knew that there was a drug by that name, that it was something that he thought he had dreamed up in Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail of 72, I guess. Anyway, and the thing he says, it was sometime after midnight in a ratty hotel room, and my memory of the conversation is hazy due to a massive ingestion of booze, fatback, and 40 cc's of adrenochrome. So then adrenochrome later finds its way into QAnon and Pizzagate, where they're saying their theory being kind of connected to the idea of blood libel and the idea of satanic ritual abuse. And you have QAnon saying that there are these child abuse sex rings. There's a cabal of Satanists that rape and murder children and harvest adrenochrome from the blood of their victims that they use as a drug or an elixir or something like that. That's crazy shit. People believe it. Why do people believe it? I don't know. I can't figure it out. I don't believe it. I know there's such a thing as adrenochrome, and I know that they use it in research and so forth, but I really don't think that it exists as what these people think it is, right? And you have other people who are like bringing this up. People who seem really smart are buying into the QAnon mythology. QAnon itself strikes me anyway as being a lot like a role-playing game or a reality game that's just kind of got out of hand. You're not really, when you're playing a game, you're supposed to have some suspension of disbelief, but you're not really supposed to assume that you're in reality. I mean, if you play Dungeons and Dragons and you start believing that you're really in a dungeon or fighting a dragon, that's not healthy. It doesn't work too well for you. But on the other hand, what we see these people doing is sort of hacking their consensus hallucination, right? Their sense of reality. And if you can get enough people to agree that this is what's real, then it becomes real for them, even though it's not real. I mean, what is subjective reality? How is subjective reality and objective reality? How are they dancing together? How are they relating to each other? Can we ever see objective reality? I don't know that we can. I mean, I certainly don't think that I have a completely objective sense of reality. And I do things like Buddhist meditation and I take some time to try to understand facts, but I also know that some facts are not really factual. That's the thing, Rudy Giuliani, truth isn't truth. I guess that's what he was trying to say when he said that. I mean, everybody made fun of him for saying that, but I kind of got what he was saying at the time in his own demented way. I mean, obviously he's a bit off the rails, right? But what he was trying to suggest is that this truth that you're presenting isn't really truth. And maybe at some level there's something to that, in that one person's truth is not necessarily a phenomenological objective truth. I don't know, because I can't see it, because I can't see past the limitations of my own senses. I can't see past the limitations of my own little fevered brain working away. So I don't know. Reality is a conspiracy, in that it's a consensus hallucination, in that you get a bunch of people to agree that something is real, and then it becomes real for them. And maybe that's the way all reality is. It's puzzling, ain't it? Well, I have reached a half-hour point, and since I do not have my co-hosts available, I don't think I want to keep talking, because I am talked out. But I do hope that you'll join us here next week, every week, Thursday nights, 7 to 8 p.m., and listen to our podcast. We launch it on Monday or Tuesday of every week. Check out our YouTube channel, and join the party. We're here to talk about really human problems. We're concerned about how people continue to survive together without completely killing each other, and without boiling the whole human race with climate change. There's so many things for us to discuss, but everything we discuss is a way to try to get back to a real sort of sane sense of things, so that we can dance together. Thanks all.